Good afternoon and welcome. We are very happy to have you with us today for our conversation on dignity and the death penalty. My name is Jennifer. I will be watching the chat box and the question box. So please, if you have questions, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Please put your questions into the Q&A box. The chat box will probably get very busy, so it could get lost there. So please go for the Q&A box. So I would invite our panelists and our interviewees to join us, and I'll go away. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer.
This is Sister Helen. I'm trying to get on. I just suddenly went off. A Grinch got in there. Hold on one second.
Well, while you do that, welcome everyone. It's good to be with you. Greg?
Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to gather people from across the country to share in the work of promoting human dignity and a consistent ethic of life.
Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just pause for a moment and say a prayer together. Your Eminence, Cardinal Gregory, would you be willing to lead us in an opening prayer?
I'd be honored. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Merciful Father, we ask your blessing on all we do to build a culture of life. Hear our prayers for those impacted by the death penalty. We pray for all people, that their lives and dignity as children of a loving God may be respected and protected in all stages and in every circumstance. We pray for victims of violence and their families, that they may experience our love and support and find comfort in your compassion and in the promise of eternal life. We pray for those on death row, that their lives may be spared, that the innocent may be freed, and that the guilty may come to acknowledge their faults and seek reconciliation with you. We pray for the families of those who are facing execution, that they may be comforted by your love and compassion. We pray for civic leaders, that they may commit themselves to respecting every human life and ending the use of the death penalty in our land. Compassionate Father, give us wisdom and hearts filled with your love. Guide us as we work to end the use of the death penalty and to build a society that truly chooses life in all of its circumstances, from conception to natural death. We ask this, Father, through your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Holy Spirit, with you and the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much, Your Eminence. Renew International, along with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, are sponsoring today's webinar, bringing together Sister Helen Prejean and Cardinal Wilton Gregory to share in a dialogue about efforts to eradicate the death penalty. Throughout this dialogue, we hope to share the richness of church teachings. We are pleased to offer this conversation as a continuation of the dialogue begun in October. You may recall, if you attended that webinar, that we did a quick pivot as Cardinal Gregory was not able to be with us at that time, and Dr. Janine Marino, Secretary of Pastoral Ministry and Social Concerns for the Archdiocese, joined Sister Helen for the conversation. As we all continue to provide strong efforts to end abortion, we remember we are called to a consistent ethic of life.
We have just a couple of housekeeping items that we just want to review real quick. Today's webinar features American Sign Language interpretation provided by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington's Office of Deaf and Disabilities Ministries. As Jen mentioned earlier, we have a chat feature, so please feel free to use that. There's also a question and answer, a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. The conversation is going to feature two moderators. Greg Tobin serves as the president and publisher of Renew International. And Greg brings to Renew some extensive experience in the executive nonprofit mission-driven leadership, including some 10 years in Catholic media at the Catholic Advocate and in higher education at Seton Hall University, both found in the Archdiocese of Newark. Most recently, for 8 years, he led international publishing and service operations at Alcoholics Anonymous World Services, Inc. Those assignments were preceded by a quarter century in creative and executive positions in the New York-based trade book publishing, leading venerable brands such as Book of the Month Club and Random House to new levels of performance. Greg graduated from Yale University, earned his master's degree in theology from Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology, and received the John Paul II Medal for Academic Excellence in 2006. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Genevieve. In other words, Renew is keeping me off the streets and keeping me busy. And you, Genevieve, my co-moderator, Genevieve Mouget, serves as the director of the Office of Social Concerns for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington. Her work oversees the connection points between Catholic social teaching, charity, and social justice. And I know firsthand it's an incredibly busy office with a wonderful group of colleagues and leadership there. Finally, many of you know our conversation partners well. Sister Helen is a nationally recognized advocate who has worked for decades promoting the cause to end the death penalty. Her work came to mainstream attention through her best-selling book, which was turned into a movie, Dead Man Walking. His Eminence, Wilton Cardinal Gregory, is the Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington. Before coming to Washington, D.C. in April 2019, he served for 15 years as Archbishop of Atlanta. Prior to that, Bishop of Belleville, and many positions of leadership and great responsibility, pastoral ministry in the United States. Cardinal Gregory is a strong advocate and prophetic leader in the work to promote the end of the death penalty and the dignity of all.
Today's webinar is going to feature a question and answer format. Greg and I will be asking questions of Sister Helen and Cardinal Gregory. Each of our guests will have time to answer each of the questions before moving on to the next. So without further ado, let's begin. Greg?
I will offer, thanks, Genevieve. I will offer the first question and ask Cardinal Gregory to respond first, followed by Sister Helen. How does one open a conversation at the parish level about the death penalty?
Well, Greg, whenever a conversation about the death penalty begins, it is my fervent hope that the conversation opens with prayer. Prayer not only stirs the hearts of those around us, but it also stirs our own hearts. Prayer is transformative. It transforms us by opening our hearts and our minds to God and toward other people. Secondly, it is important to remember that this is a conversation about the death penalty. Conversations involve dialogue, or we would say discussion, along with an exchange of ideas and perspectives. Dialogue includes speaking with one another in Christian charity. In our culture, sadly, too many people make assumptions about other people and their motivations, and we fail to listen to one another. In true dialogue, we set aside our own motivations and genuinely and earnestly try to listen to the other person.
Sister Helen?
Well, there are a number of ways informally, just when we're going to Mass or whatever, and things that are happening. For example, stories that come out about wrongfully convicted people, and it gets on the news. And when you have knowledge about what's going on, like there are now 187 wrongfully convicted people, which shows how broken the thing is. A conversation starter is something that's happening. What just happened in California is the governor just released everybody off of death row, except for people who have been violent offenders, and put them in the general prison population. Now, what does this mean? Well, all this that we were told these people are the worst of the worst, these people are irredeemable, we got to put them in a special section with guards, so that they're being released out with the other prisoners. That's a sign of their humanity and that they can grow and they can change. So things going on. When I've been invited to a parish, I take people with me on my journey. I always start with an assumption that people are good, that people who say they believe in the death penalty probably have not heard much about it and been able to descend deeper into the spiritual challenge that's really in the death penalty and the gospel of Jesus, to give them a chance. So I do it through story, and I do it through great respect for people. We just had the feast of Francis de Sales, who's the patron of writers, for Catholic writers. And he had to be persuasive, because he was there with the Calvinists, and he found a gentle way of entering into dialogue when things were so heated in the whole Calvinist Catholic thing that was going on. So we look for openings and we begin the conversation. And it can be as simple as, I got to tell you, you know what? I got an insight about the death penalty I never got before. I can start anywhere, but as long as we're in, as the Cardinal said, an open dialogue mood, to not just foist our assumptions on them, but to listen to each other.
Thank you. I think that's a really good reminder for all of us, from both Cardinal Gregory and from you, Sister Helen, about the power of listening and actually engaging in the dialogue. So my question that I pose to both of you is, what role would the pastor and the parish team play in advancing that dialogue?
Well, Genevieve, the engagement of the faithful in this dialogue with their pastor is absolutely key. The pastor, as the shepherd of the parish, is to guide the faithful and to help form them in the teachings of our church. The pastor can and should form a social justice ministry team from among the parish leaders. This ministry team should then engage the parish community in dialogue on the death penalty and related issues, the church's teachings on a consistent ethic of life, the promotion of the life and dignity of every human being from conception to natural death, and the prophetic call for justice and for God's mercy.
Helen?
Yeah, I think with this issue, I've noticed over the years, pastors have had a really, really hard time. It's a very, very controversial issue because they can stand up in the pulpit and speak up for innocent life, unborn children, and that's part of who we are as Catholics. But to introduce the death penalty into a parish, it entails going on a journey with the people. You can't just get up and give a homily on the death penalty. It's going to entail digging into it, and he goes along and accompanies the people in that dialogue. And he lets the people do the prophetic role. The deacons are going into prisons more now. People are going into prisons more now. People have direct experience, what Pope Francis calls all the time, the gospel of encounter, to encounter people in prison, to encounter people on death row, to encounter murder victims' families who are suffering, to encounter the families who have people in prison and on death row. And the pastor's role would be one who gathers the people together, but in humility and simplicity, is one who learns along with the people. I think it's really, really important that that happens, and wish all the best. And people, we have to love our pastors, and we have to work with them and help them and not criticize them. Why didn't he ever give a talk on this? Or why didn't he ever do that? Got to get in there in those justice and peace groups, you know, those little sparks of light and of the gospel and connecting us with justice. For a long time as Catholics, I wrote about this in River of Fire, my own awakening to justice. We've been good on Mass and spirituality. We've been good on charity. But justice is we opening up a new road in the field. And so we got to be patient and help each other as we do that.
Thank you, Sister and Cardinal. This next question teases out a little further the same or a similar topic. We know as laity that issues of capital punishment and life sentencing are polarizing. They can be, and they really are, among the Catholic faithful. So from that point of view, having spoken about the pastors and the staff, the ordained clergy, roles in this, what about in our parishes, our lay people, inviting our lay people to engage in dialogue about these issues? It's uncomfortable for us too, and that creates an obstacle. What are your thoughts perhaps about encouraging and inviting the laity? Cardinal Gregory.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Greg. These conversations can be polarizing and painful because they introduce things that people have deep feelings about and personal experience of in some cases. And families and friends can often find themselves on opposite sides of the issue. We need to have the courage to admit this challenge to ourselves and to our parishes and parishioners. As I shared earlier, prayer and humanity and humility are key. The Holy Father reminds us in Fratelli Tutti that dialogue calls for perseverance and patience. It doesn't happen immediately. It's a slow but important process. And he notes that there are moments of silence and suffering. Parish leaders can and should remind their fellow parishioners about the need for perseverance and patience during these conversations. Be kind to one another, especially to those who may have a different opinion. It's the beginning of a sincere dialogue that will move the hearts of our faithful.
And we bring to dialogue our experiences. You know, if we get into a discussion of death penalty or life imprisonment, as there's a starter, as a surface when you enter into it. Often I hear a lot of people say, personally, I'd rather go ahead and be executed and get a life sentence, because then you had to live the rest of your life in prison. That's coming out of not having any experience at all of what it would mean to sit in a cell and mark the days off on your calendar that you're going to be killed in a week or 2 weeks. And it's not that we're bad, but we come out of our experience, and our experience can be really limited. And that's why any discussion that goes on in a parish about prison, life imprisonment, death penalty, we need to feed it. We need to feed it with people in the parish that have some experience. We also need to encourage each other to read. There's a lot to learn of the whole prison system and how it came out of slavery. The whole use of police force and how that came out of slavery and Jim Crow. Anybody could do a citizen's arrest of a Black man who was loitering on the street, the police force. So there's an awakening, a sign of the time going on right now is there's a huge awakening in the country among white people about race. And George Floyd opened it. It's going on. It happened in Virginia, and it helped Virginia end the death penalty. But we always got to be willing to gather a group of people, read and discuss and go deeper. Opening conversation is just the first part of it, but then to go deeper together, that is the gift of a faith community, that we can do that together with each other.
And you know, Sister, just to underscore what you just said, the Holy Fathers have also advanced in their understanding of what the death penalty does to a society. Yeah. You will recall that in the first edition of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the death penalty was described as it should be rare. But then Pope John Paul II said, not only should it be rare, but it has to reflect a sense of appropriateness, and it needs to be lessened. And now Pope Francis says it's never acceptable.
I just want to throw in this direct dialogue. Speaking of dialogue, I got to have a direct dialogue with Pope John Paul about the death penalty. It was around the case of this man, Joseph Odell in Virginia. And what I said to him was, Your Holiness, because you see, when he wrote Evangelium Vitae, he had pushed the death penalty to the edge. He had talked about the inviolable dignity of life. And I thought he was going to do it. I thought he was going to say under no circumstances, which is what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But then he said, but in cases of absolute necessity, and I knew as long as we had that loophole, that DA in New Orleans quoted the Pope, they're all going to quote him. And so in the dialogue, and you know, when you have a dialogue with a Pope, it's no different from our having a dialogue with each other. I mean, you don't have any special Pope words. I mean, when you meet the Pope, Cardinal, you got any Pope words, special words you use? It's
just, and this Pope wouldn't accept them anyhow.
It's just Christian to Christian. Anyway, the heart of the conversation with him was, I said, Your Holiness, I meet a lot of Catholics who say they're pro-life, but when it comes to the death penalty, they make a distinction. And what they really are saying is they're pro-innocent life. But when it comes to somebody who's made a mistake and done something terrible, they believe they ought to die for it. And I said, can you help our church? Can you help us to come to that every life has inviolable dignity, the guilty as well as the innocent? And it wasn't me. It was the dialogue was bubbling up in the whole church, which is where the Holy Spirit guides us. And then when he was in St. Louis for the first time in 1999, Pope John Paul II, Cardinal knows this by heart, for the first time, put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. And he said, no to abortion, no to euthanasia. And he said, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And that then set it up for Pope Francis then in August 2018 to put in the catechism for the first time, no matter how grave the crime, we can never entrust over to government authorities that the authority which is only God's to take life. So it's the people, it's all of us we developed together. It's been kind of wonderful to see that change. It was 1,500 years. A dialogue on the death penalty since Augustine in the 5th century said that the evil could be coerced with the sword.
I loved the back and forth. And so I don't know that I necessarily wanted it to end. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I think it speaks to the level of engagement and the necessity to have this conversation. So I'm just going to move us on to the next question and hope that we continue that. Acknowledging the human dignity of persons who've committed serious crimes can be challenging to many people. And we've kind of spoken about that and heard both of you speak to that. How can we help? How can we, the people in the parishes, the parishioners in the pew, how can we help to really lift up the dignity of all human persons, specifically around the committing serious crimes?
Well, you know, Genevieve, recognizing human dignity, the human dignity of anyone, especially those who have committed a serious crime, is a challenge for many people. And it is a struggle to bridge that moment between what they have done and their own human dignity. It is not always easy to remember that every person is made in God's image and likeness. And it is harder to remember this when a person has committed, a horrible crime like murder or child sexual abuse. However, God has made each and every one of us in his image and in his likeness. And therefore, we all possess that human dignity given to us by God. God's love never abandons us, and it's as the psalmist says, it's everlasting. While we may struggle to love one another and to be merciful as our Heavenly Father is, we are nonetheless called to love and to have mercy on everyone. Taking the life of someone who has committed a crime and a sin, it does not bring peace, and it does not bring about justice. It is instead vengeful, and vengeance fails to recognize and respect the dignity of people. There is no limit to how much God loves us and is willing to forgive us. We have equal dignity before God's eyes, and we receive his love beyond our human understanding.
One of the things that makes it really hard to have respect for somebody who's done an unspeakable crime in this society, when you have a death penalty, what you're really saying is that out of all the people who have murdered, this is one of the criteria of the Supreme Court, we're only going to pick out the worst of the worst. So automatically now we're saying these people, by calling them the worst of the worst, we're saying they're so bad, they're so evil, we can't even put them in prison because they'll kill other inmates. They are irredeemable. And it's very difficult then when we're made to be afraid of them. These people are so terrible. And I read in Parade magazine how somebody was in and they let him out on parole and he killed somebody. I mean, people get these snippets of things. But any encounter that any of us have with someone in prison or someone who has done something terrible, or even in our own life, maybe there was a terrible divorce, maybe there was a father really mean to his wife, or all kinds of, when we encounter that person, especially with death row inmates, they have received 1,000 signals from the time they wake up in the morning till they fall asleep at night that they are nothing but disposable human waste. It's the way they're treated. And so if they have a medical problem on death row, they need a wisdom tooth pulled, there's no respect.
Unknown caller.
Because automatically people say, yeah, you're just trying to get over on us, always suspected with the worst. Where it really comes out, where I experienced it most intensely, was during the actual execution of the 6 people I've accompanied. The humanity, the dignity, the presence of Christ in that room with that person, that they are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Every human being is more than the worst thing they ever, and have a potential to grow. And that's one of the real terrible things about the death penalty, is us taking it on ourselves to say that we can send them into eternity. God must be finished with them. We're finished with them. And so as we develop information, and one of the ways we can grow in respect is through reading stories, hearing stories of people, and to see how they have changed. They would be great people who have gotten out of prison to be the speaker in the parish, or people who were put in wrongly and went through that ordeal for 30 years. And now here they are, and they don't have any desire for vengeance or to get even. And here you meet this beautiful man who's been transformed. We need to encounter that as directly as we can in as many ways as we can.
And one of the things that we know to be true is that people who are on death row frequently have had such awful childhood themselves, right. Or their psychological or mental capacity is such that yes, they have done terrible things, but what drove them, or what resources did they lack as young people to help them distinguish between right or wrong, violence or charity? And occasionally when people are put to death, and we hear or discover that their IQ is so minimal that they wouldn't even understand, they couldn't appreciate what they were being punished for.
We just watched that execution of Matthew Reeves. He was so mentally impaired, he didn't even know that he had a choice, that he could have decided on another method of execution and thus had his life saved, at least for a while. It's unspeakable. It's unspeakable. And that's one of the reasons why we could never entrust over to government that we're going to be able to set up a system and a criteria that we're going to be able to decide who truly deserves to die. It just isn't in our hands.
Thank you again, both. This is amazing dialogue. The next question. For many people, Jesus' teaching on forgiveness is one of the most difficult principles in the Gospels. How can Catholic women and men be helped to accept that central teaching and apply it to people who have committed serious crimes?
You know, Greg, forgiveness is not ever easy. When we as individuals dealing with one another, obviously under much different circumstances than the death penalty, we find it difficult to really forgive another person. And sometimes, and I've used this example in the sacrament of reconciliation, we say the words "we forgive," but then we remember. I forgive you, but I'm not going to. But that's not how God forgives. God forgives and he forgets. Not that the divine is capable of, but he wipes it clean. He allows us to start over again. And Jesus does call us to forgive in that fashion. The Gospels say that you must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Christ says that we must forgive those who sin against us 70 times 7. And obviously, it's not a numerical category. It's like every time someone who has offended you, hurt you, made you feel awful, how many times do you have to forgive them? Jesus says, every time they express their sorrow, you have to forgive them. And he never says it's going to be easy. He never says that it's something that any of us, no matter all the people on this panel, no matter what our experiences, our backgrounds, if we are hurt, it's difficult for us to forgive. And if we say it's easy to forgive, we're being dishonest with ourselves.
The one stellar story that I have of a human being that taught me about forgiveness is Lloyd LeBlanc. His son David was killed by the first man I was with who was executed. He was just 17. Lloyd was the only son, loved his son. They fixed cars together. And he sees his son on a Friday night who goes to a homecoming game, and he is found shot at close range, back of the head, in a sugarcane field in Louisiana. His journey began, and I got to be friends with him with special grace. And he explained to me, he took me with him on the inside of that journey to forgiveness. And he said, you know, sister, most people think forgiveness is weak, that it means you're condoning what the person did, like it's okay. He said, of course, it's not okay. But what the journey for him was that he was eaten alive with anger. And he's snapping at his wife and making her cry. And he is, because he was always kind. He was losing himself in the anger. He kept praying, Jesus, you got to help me. He knew it wasn't the gospel. He knew it wasn't what Jesus was calling him to. And that when the grace came, the way it came to him was, he was telling me about it, and he put his hand out like that. And then I said, they killed my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he taught me then, when you look at that word forgive, and it's in all the deep spiritual traditions, it's in Buddhism, it's in Hinduism. When you look at the word forgive, it means to give before, to not let the evil take over you so that then you lose your life. There's one of the sayings that someone who seeks the journey of revenge should first dig 2 graves. And Lord LeBlanc, the saving grace was that he recognized that he was losing his own life. And he set out then on the path of forgiveness. And God's grace came to him. And it meant that the love in him stayed intact. In a way, forgiveness may be saving your own life.
I don't know about anyone else on the moderated discussion, but I could sit and listen to both of you talk about forgiveness for another 6 hours. That was so powerful. Both of you, thank you. This next question, I think, kind of leads us into a larger discussion. And can you both speak to how does racial or ethnic backgrounds of prisoners affect the way that they are treated in our criminal justice system? And I recognize that's a very big question to state it like that, but we're leaving it big intentionally. So if you could speak to that.
You know, Genevieve, it's been demonstrated in many statistical studies and analyses that the death penalty is not imposed proportionate to the representation of the people in a society. There are more African Americans and Hispanic Americans on death row proportionately than the number of people in the broader society. And we know that oftentimes it's because poor people can't afford the kind of legal protection and help when they face a serious allegation that more affluent people can. We know that, for example, the numbers of people who have been exonerated because of DNA testing and witnesses who have backed away from previous testimony, that it's disproportionate among people of color. We are all human beings. We are all capable of doing great things and capable of doing awful things. But one group cannot have more cases leveled against them without the opportunities that the other group does. So I used to go, and I haven't been able to go here in Washington, primarily because of the lockdown. I've been the Archbishop of Washington going on 2 years, but I've been under lockdown for 2 years. So I can't do the visits that I did in Atlanta. It would break my heart to walk into Jackson or one of the other penal institutions in the Archdiocese and see the number of young people, young Black and brown people, disproportionate to the numbers in the society, in prison. There's something terribly wrong with a system that is not even-handed in practicing justice.
Well, with the way the Supreme Court set up the death penalty and just the whole history of penal institutions coming straight out of slavery. So when the plantation owners lost their slaves, and they all walked off and they were free, what were they going to do to get workers? And so they'd have things like loitering or anything where you put them in jail, and then you have these convict teams working on plantations. I mean, what they would get the workers back, because what are Black people going to do? And we still call Angola 18,000 acres made up of 3 former slave plantations. And when you go into the prison and you watch the men walking out in the fields with hose over their backs and guards on horseback with guns at the beginning and end of the column, they're 90% black people. And the more you look at the roots of the racism that came out of slavery, it's in the penal system. It's how it got set up. What became clear to me when I lived in the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans, when I got out of the white suburbs, where I was only with other white people, and then I entered into the community and African-American people became my teachers, I could see the difference in the newspaper. When a white tourist was killed in the French Quarter, front page. White, anybody killed, front page. And you couldn't find it on page 30 when a kid in St. Thomas had been killed. And because the way the Supreme Court set up the death penalty in particular it's supposed to be this criteria of the worst of the worst, but it's coupled with the discretionary power of prosecutors to seek it or not. If a prosecutor doesn't seek death, nobody dies. From square one, that prosecutor has the option not to seek death. And when we see now, and we got the track record of over 1,500 executions, who was chosen for death, 8 out of 10, it's because they killed a white person. You got to feel outrage when a victim's killed. You got to value the life of a person when they're murdered. What is the death of a young Black man in this country? So if you don't value the life of the person who's been murdered, you're not going to seek the ultimate penalty and all the expense. It's not a blip on the screen. So it's just another reason why we can never entrust death of all things. But look at the penal system and just look how when it was changed, it used to be drugs. Having drugs was a misdemeanor. And then it got changed to felony for the smallest amount of drugs, of marijuana, just a bit of it in your pocket, and you get sent for 20 years, or you get long, long sentences. And when you get out of prison and you have felony on your record, it's like you go to get a job. Have you ever been convicted in a prison for a felony? And so you can't get public assistance. That's why it was called by Michelle Alexander the new Jim Crow, because it disenfranchises you from the freedoms that you ought to have as a citizen. The whole penal system has been set up that way. And so overwhelmingly it's racist. But the core of the racism in it has to do with how much we value particular victim. All life ought to be valued equally, but it isn't, because our natural biases and prejudices enter into the criminal justice system, especially in those discretionary powers that prosecutors have. In the South, in New Orleans, in Louisiana, when prosecutors ran for public office, they'd brag about how many death penalties they got.
Thank you. Thank you both. And Genevieve, now we will go into a brief Q&A session. We have approximately a little more than 15 minutes, so we'll try to get as much Q&A as possible in here, with immense gratitude for the discussion and the questions that have been answered thus far. And I'll pick one from the Q&A. Genevieve, is that right?
So there's actually some questions already in front of you, Greg, that have been collated.
Oh, yes, I see. Okay,
Perfect.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I see that they've been gleaned from Q&A. How do we talk about this with family members and friends who disagree with the church's position? Within our own families, taking our church home and our discussions and our evangelization and dialogue at home. Your thoughts about, to our panelists, how do we talk to our family members?
I would say, Greg, the first thing we have to do is to remember to be tender. They are our family. They are our sons and daughters, our husbands and grandparents. So we have to be tender with them. And then I think we might have to find an example other than the death penalty to initiate the conversation, where perhaps we say, you know, Grandpa, you used to say that this was wrong, and now it's not quite as bad as it was when, you know, when I was going off to college. How did you change, Grandpa? How did this decision that you thought, you know, 20 years ago was so awful is now maybe it's not quite as bad as I thought it was? How did you experience change, Grandpa?
Right. Oh, that's really good. To help people get in touch with their own experience. And when we have an opportunity to say, you know, I used to think that too. And then just say, what changed us? If in fact we have changed, especially when people are talking about the pain of victims, we don't want to move too quickly from that. We need to stand there with them in that pain. In fact, when I was writing Dead Man Walking, the editor, Jason Epstein, helped me when I did the new draft of Dead Man Walking. I had spent too much time on the humanness and why the person should be executed. And he said, you wait far too long before you get into the crime and the suffering of the victims. If you don't talk about it in the first 10 pages of this book, nobody's going to read your book. So when we're talking to people, a lot of the fire underneath it, or the angst and the outrage, is look what happens to innocent people. And we really have to stand there with them in that and talk about the suffering. And then as we talk about it, then what do you think could really answer that? What do we need to do to help people who have lost a loved one, if it's murder that we're talking about? And then we can just say, what does our state do for people who are victims of violence? And to just start talking about a path where healing help can be given to people other than killing of the one who killed alone.
Thank you. It was a much needed refresher for me as I just came back from Christmas, you know, as everyone did, and engaged with family and had lively discussions, being tender and approaching things with a quiet stillness, I think is a good way to remember all of that. My next question, why isn't it fair that a person who takes a life would pay with his or her life? And we've had some questions, you know, pop up in the chat as well, talking about scripture and scripture references. So if either of you want to speak to that, that would be a helpful framing.
Well, when you say, why isn't it fair? Because Jesus says it isn't fair. In those scriptural quotes, he starts out with, you have heard it said that an eye for an eye, but I say, if you do something against a neighbor, you know, you're violating the law of justice. So it is Christ himself who has shifted the issue of what is fair and what is not fair. Primarily, in his witness, the Father has forgiven us. The Father has forgiven us. And Jesus says, now you have to do the same thing to one another. So it is the scriptural shift that moves us from an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and all of those things. Why? Because Christ tells us that the Father loves us unconditionally in spite of all that we've done. And people might say, well, I've never killed anyone. Well, that might be true. You may never have taken someone's life, but you may have hurt someone so deeply by something that you said, something that you did, that while you didn't take their lives, you certainly damaged their lives. And the Father has forgiven you if you ask.
Yeah, it's you know, in this country, around this country, talking with people, I've heard this argument a lot, a moral equivalency. They kill, they die. Where else in our justice system would we ever duplicate the crime that a person did in order to punish them? I mean, if somebody rapes somebody, you got a rape squad in prison. Come around every Friday night, you rape, we're going to rape you. You burn down a house, we're going to burn down your house. When you do that, we will do to you what you did to your victim. Then it becomes very treacherous because of the brutalizing effect that it has on us. And that's why I tell the story often of the guards that have to actually do the executions for us. Somebody's spouting off, well, yeah, they deserve to die. Oftentimes people just say that because it's that deep anger and outrage at what's happened. But they actually, because if you ask them, well, would you do it? I mean, would you be willing then to do this moral equivalency? Would you carry it out? Most people really don't. They're spouting off. But when you see what happens to the guards close that do these executions and what happens to them, and when you bring people close to that, they go, well, yeah, I mean, they can begin to see that it actually harms us or harms the people that work within the system. In terms of the scriptures, we have, this is just classic, where people do these proof texting things where they're going to get their biblical quote, biblical quarterback, and you toss me your quote, I'm going to toss you my quote. You go back and forth like that. But to get into the spirit of the scriptures and the thrust where the scriptures take us, starting with the prophets. And so you had Martin Luther King, when he did his campaign with the people, he started with the prophets. It was Amos, let justice roll down like water, and compassion. That's the thread in the scriptures that we want to follow, which every spiritual tradition does. But this biblical quoting stuff, believe me, I mean, I listened to Justice Scalia, Catholic guy on the Supreme Court, use Romans 13, St. Paul's epistle, to justify using the death penalty. That when we obey civil authority, we actually obeying God. The death penalty is the law of the land. You obey authority and you obey God. And look how shallow that is. But there's a tendency to want to quote those scriptures because who doesn't want to have God backing them up in their argument, as God has said. And then they do the little biblical quote back and forth. It's got to go much deeper than that in the conversation than to just have biblical quotes. And another deep thing that's possibly the most misunderstood thing is that people said Jesus died on the cross. And so they committed sin. They die on their cross of execution, and that's how they get saved. Because their understanding of the crucifixion and the way Jesus saved us was to offer the sacrifice of his life to the Father whose sense of justice had been offended. And you pay for your crime. That whole thing of pain and punishment has really been built around that understanding that God is pleased with pain and punishment. And look, he asked for the sacrifice of his own son.
You know, Sister, I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the impact of taking a person's life on the people in prison. I remember reading, you probably know far more specifically, that when they would have a firing squad as the means of execution, one of the rifles had a blank, right, so that the executioners never knew who actually executed the person. There was always the possibility that I had the blank. Why? Yeah. Because I think it was so unthinkable, even in a very harsh and punitive society, you had to give some flexibility so that the executioners could at least say, well, I didn't do it, I had the blank.
Yeah, well, that's such a great example, you know. And then what would it mean to change over from places of punishment where people end up being more dehumanized to restorative justice? To begin to build in our society. It's starting in little bitty ways, but it's starting like drug courts. Why are you going to throw a young person in prison for the rest of his life. You send him to a drug court and he gets help with his addiction, healing and restoring life rather than just punishing and adding pain onto pain that was already there.
Wow. Thank you so much to both Cardinal Gregory and Sister Helen for that very in-depth answer and just pulling apart and taking the thread and weaving it through so that we can talk and learn a little bit more from both of you. I actually don't want to stop, but we have a hard stop right now. And so I just want to thank you so much for being here with all of us. And for those that are here and have joined the webinar, thank you for being here in this moderated conversation. This time together has afforded us much to think about, to question, to dialogue with one another going forward. And we've seen lots of dialoguing in the chat as it's been going on, and the questions keep coming in as well. A special thank you to our friends at Renew International for coming alongside of us and offering us the opportunity to work with you once again in such a collaborative effort. And finally, also a big thank you to the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington's Office of Life Issues, Deaf and Disabilities Ministries, and the Social Concerns Office. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this for Mary O'Mara. She did an amazing job interpreting. And thank you so much, Mary, for all of your work.
Thank you.
I considered it a particular grace to share this hour with Sister Helen once again. She will probably remember we were together in Atlanta with Bishop Wright, doing a similar thing. Yeah, I like to be with Sister Helen because she makes me look good. Thank you.
Glad to be with everybody. Great to be with you, Cardinal.
Thank you.
Much gratitude. Thank you. Thank
Jennifer,
you both.
you're muted.
God bless.
Oh, sorry. As we close, I just want to share a little bit here. And we do have a resource available called Dignity and the Death Penalty. It is based on Sister Helen's work, and it gives just some wonderful, wonderful insights. It's prayerful and reflective, and it's a great means of starting a conversation, joining in a conversation. We will actually be hosting sessions online. And if you go to our website, renewintl.org/events, you will see our Lenten faith sharing. As a thank you to all of you for joining in this conversation, we have a wonderful discount code that'll get you 20% off. We'll email you all of this. And also something that came up, in the chats, there's a wonderful organization called the Catholic Mobilizing Network. And they partnered with us to create this resource. And so they are a great resource for those who are looking to learn more. And thank you. I mentioned this in the chat, but Sister Helen and Cardinal, you could not see, but there were people who were asking questions, and they were doing it with open hearts and open minds. And it really was a wonderful, wonderful conversation going on among them. So thank you to everyone for that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.